My wife arrived from her trip with her friends without her wedding ring. So I announced the divorce to her face and said, "I think I know everything." She tried to deceive me by saying that she lost it by accident, that perhaps it slipped off her finger in the sea, or that she forgot it in a hotel bathroom. The versions changed as I pressed her, and this made me even more certain that there was something dirty behind that face that now seemed so strange, so unfamiliar. The ring, for her, had become just a ring, and for me, confirmation that there were no more us. What she didn't imagine was that her best friend, with tears in her eyes and anger trapped in her chest, had told me the whole truth, or at least part of it. What I did after that was cold, calculated, and devastating, and not just to her. She didn't expect me to find out. He imagined that his little theater of good intentions, the fake laughs on the phone during the trip, the carefully selected photos on social media with captions about friendship and freedom, were enough to keep me distracted and blind. I, on the other hand, had already felt for weeks that there was something wrong, something silent between us that couldn't be said in words, but that revealed itself in averted glances, absent touches and automatic responses. Messages no longer had emojis. Calls got shorter. The goodbye kiss before going on a trip with her friends lasted 3 seconds, but it hurt like abandonment. When she came back, I first noticed her eyes. They were different. It was as if she was embarrassed, but she tried to mask it with forced enthusiasm. The hugs didn't last, the looks didn't last. And what broke me inside, what gave me the confirmation that no detective could give me, was the absence of the ring. No, she hadn't lost. She had given up on the commitment because, on that trip, she was already in another life. A life where I didn't exist. And, worse, a life she planned to live forever. Where's the ring? I think I lost it on the beach. I must have slipped, he replied, his eyes leaving mine. Did you lose? I repeated, fixing my gaze on her, waiting for some crack, any trace of truth. I swear, love, it was by accident. I didn't even notice. Don't call me love. The silence spread like a deep crack and she swallowed hard, realizing that perhaps this would be the beginning of the end, or what she believed to be the end. What she didn't know was that the truth had already reached me through another mouth. Her best friend, with whom I have always had a relationship of mutual respect, came to me after the trip with a devastated expression. He said he couldn't bear to keep it any longer, that he couldn't sleep, and that he felt complicit in something cruel. And it was there, between sobs and broken sentences, that she told me everything. The photos of her with another man, the hidden dinners, the affectionate nicknames, the whispered promises on night flights, but what destroyed me was the last detail. Not only was my wife having an affair, she had bought tickets to run away with him, leave everything behind, including our marriage. It was all planned, for 3 weeks from now. A new country, a new life, and me off the map like a mistake to be forgotten. His name? I still don't know. But it exists. It's in her calendar, in her search histories, in her deleted messages, in the dreams she never shared with me. A man who made her laugh in a way I no longer did, who made her feel alive while I worked, dreaming of a trip for both of us, a renewal of vows, a fresh start. Irony of fate, no. While I was planning to meet again, she was already rehearsing how to leave me. And when I realized this, everything in me froze. Love became silent fury, affection became strategy. I would come out on top, I would expose her as she exposed me, only without shouting, without scandal. I would make her feel the weight of what she did. And what's more, it would make her realize that the man she was exchanging was precisely the one who would make her pay dearly for every lie. I confronted her. Not in the heat of emotion, but in the coldness of certainty. Let's get a divorce. I've already spoken to the lawyer. He said, without blinking. What? Wait, why? You're exaggerating. I think I already know everything. And more than that. I'm already taking action. Did you lose your ring? Well, you'll lose a lot more. Her expression changed. The theater left, despair came. The mask fell and gave way to panic. She tried to stop me. He begged, cried, lied once again, saying it was all in my head. But the damage was already done. I had discovered that the escape ticket had been purchased. A new destination, 2 tickets. One of them with her name. The other was named after someone who would soon know the taste of ruin. Because what she didn't expect, what no one expected, was what I would do with that information. I would let her think the plan was still on. That the disguise still worked. But behind, I moved silently, preparing a counterattack. And when the day of escape arrived, I would be there. Not to stop her. But to reveal that everything she had planned, every detail, every step, was now in my control. Because when you lose everything for love, you gain freedom to do whatever you want. And I wanted justice. She didn't know that the country she was going to had different rules. She didn't know that her new love was just a piece in my game. She didn't know that, in the end, the betrayed would be the winner. And she, the victim of her own choices. But what happened on the day of the trip? Who was the man she planned to run away with? And what did I do to turn the day of escape into the day of your fall? The answer is closer than you imagine, and more painful than she ever dreamed. Now tell me, are you ready to find out what really happens when someone chooses to betray someone who has always been by their side? Welcome to the channel. Here, we never support any type of betrayal. On the contrary, we use fictional and intense stories to show how infidelity can destroy homes, hearts, and entire lives. Each narrative is a warning about the devastating consequences of wrong choices. Get ready, because what are you going to hear now? It's realistic, painful, and shocking. Settle in. The story will begin. They met on a warm spring Sunday, the kind that announces nothing, but saw everything. His name was Daniel, 38 years old, successful at what he did, managing director of an import company that was growing rapidly, but which he led with the sobriety of someone who never allowed himself to fly too high. Clara, on the other hand, was movement and contrast, a literature teacher. She spoke with her eyes and thought with her body. She was 34 years old, with a restless soul and a beauty that came less from aesthetics and more from magnetism, the way she listened to people, the way she touched on delicate subjects with lightness, the way she made anyone feel important. They didn't fall in love immediately. It was an almost scientific process that began with a shy exchange of glances in a coffee shop and culminated in an unpretentious invitation to an alternative film festival, followed by endless conversations in the car seat, hands that accidentally touched each other and smiles that insisted on remaining. The relationship blossomed quickly, but without rushing. A year later, they lived together. 2 years later, they married in a small, elegant and sincere ceremony. The exchanged vows were neither memorized nor exaggerated, they were real, spoken with the naturalness of someone who did not promise eternity, but presence, partnership and respect. Daniel and Clara built their marriage like building a house, a solid foundation, brick by brick, without rushing to get to the top. The apartment they lived in was a reflection of both of them, cozy, with plants hanging in the windows, books everywhere, paintings with poetic phrases and furniture that mixed wood and iron. Daniel was more reserved, he liked routines, set times, and silence when he woke up. Clara was the opposite, she woke up listening to music, drank coffee on the kitchen floor and improvised dinners even without enough ingredients. And yet, they worked. Or at least they believed so. Friends said they were an inspiring couple. They smiled together in photos, traveled whenever they could, and had simple traditions like wine night on Fridays and walks in the park on Sundays. Clara laughed at Daniel's bad jokes, and he was proud of the students who sent letters of thanks to his wife. There was, indeed, love. Not that movie love, which explodes into grandiose gestures and tears, but everyday, discreet love, which shows itself in care, in details, in small renunciations made without fuss. Daniel, for example, stopped working on Saturdays when he realized that Clara felt alone. Clara, in turn, gave up a specialization course in another state so as not to be far from him. These choices, never demanded, were seen as part of what makes a marriage more than just coexistence. They were silent demonstrations of loyalty. Despite having very different routines, they respected each other's spaces. Clara maintained a small studio in the second bedroom of the apartment where she wrote, painted, and received her friends for tea sessions and deep conversations. Daniel, on the other hand, preferred to retreat to his office, where he immersed himself in spreadsheets, technical books and, sometimes, strategy games that he played online to unwind. They didn't intrude, but they always met in the middle, on the living room couch, on the kitchen counter, in bed at the end of the day. They shared the silences as much as the words. There were nights when they didn't say anything for hours, but one look was enough for them to know how the other felt. In recent months, however, something subtle has begun to change. There were no fights or serious arguments. It was more like an emotional cold that no one wanted to admit. The once comfortable silences began to feel charged. Clara started to sleep later, Daniel woke up earlier. Dinners became shorter, conversations more objective, touches less frequent. There was no anger, but there was also no longer that natural sweetness. Daniel began to notice that Clara was more thoughtful, more distant. He asked her a few times if everything was okay and she always responded with a short smile, the kind that ends prematurely. She talked about a certain restlessness, about the desire to do something different, to rediscover herself. She mentioned, with restrained enthusiasm, a trip with her childhood friends. A reunion planned for years, according to her, but which was always postponed due to different commitments. Now, they were all available. They would go to the coast, a house facing the sea, a week of rest, laughter and old stories. Daniel didn't object. Encouraged. He said she deserved it, that it would be good for her to disconnect from her routine. He knew how much she valued these long-time friendships, and seeing the sparkle in her eyes as she planned the trip convinced him it would be a good idea. Maybe the time away would also help them breathe. As she packed her suitcase, he watched her. Clara was radiant, like she hadn't seen in weeks. I carefully separated the dresses, tested combinations, took photos of the clothes to send to the group with my friends. Laugh alone. I sang while organizing the products in the toiletry bag. Daniel felt a mixture of joy and melancholy. It was good to see her happy, but at the same time, something inside him was starting to bother him. As if that sudden glow of hers was out of place. An uncomfortable spark that he tried to ignore. On the day of departure, he took her to the airport. He kissed her forehead, hugged her tighter than usual. She said she would call as soon as she arrived, and he nodded, watching as she disappeared among the other women. On the way back, the silence inside the car seemed heavier than usual. But Daniel was not a man to create storms. I trusted her. Always trusted. And he repeated this to himself like a mantra while preparing dinner for one. During the following days, Clara sent messages with photos of the sunset, short videos of her friends playing, audios telling of the day's little adventures. He responded with emojis, affectionate words, and allowed himself to smile when he heard her voice talking about a new restaurant they had discovered. It felt like things were getting back to normal. Daniel, on some level, hoped that the trip would renew not only Clara's spirits, but also their relationship. Maybe, after they get back, they could plan something together. A trip for two, a new project, anything that would bring them closer together again. But on the day of return, everything changed. He picked her up at the airport as he had agreed. He saw her from afar, beautiful as always, hair tied up in a messy bun, sunglasses and a smile that seemed to hesitate. When she approached, the hug was short. The conversation in the car was superficial. He pretended not to notice. But when he got home, while Clara was taking a shower, he noticed. The absence. The lack. That ring that she never took off, not even to wash her face. It wasn't on his finger. The mark still visible on the skin gave away the habit, but the ring wasn't there. Daniel didn't say anything at that moment. He swallowed the discomfort like someone swallowing a fish bone. He watched in silence, his mind buzzing. And while she ate dinner and talked about her friends, he just listened. Her every word seemed to echo inside him with noise. Clara seemed relaxed, even too much so. As if I were light, relieved. As if he had gotten rid of a weight. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He lay down next to her, but his mind was spinning. I thought about everything, her gestures, her silences, her recent smiles, the subtle changes of the last few weeks. I thought about how the absence of a ring could say so much. But he didn't say anything. Not yet. Because what was to come demanded silence. And he was ready to listen. Daniel spent the next few days enveloped in a fog of confused thoughts, trying to deal with that almost insignificant absence, but which grew inside him like a slowly expanding hole. The absence of an alliance. Clara did not wear the ring again in the days following the trip. He observed discreetly, waiting for some spontaneous explanation that never came. When she finally worked up the courage to ask, she smiled vaguely and said that she had lost it somewhere along the way, perhaps in the water or in the airport bathroom, that she was devastated about it, but that she was already looking for a similar piece of jewelry to replace it. The way he spoke seemed trained. No hesitation, no surprise, no real pain at the loss. As if the symbol of their union could be exchanged like an old t-shirt. Daniel just nodded, swallowing that answer with the same difficulty as swallowing a dry thorn. Didn't argue. He didn't accuse. He kept it for himself. Something inside him peeled off at that moment. And he never returned to that place. The days that used to pass with the comfortable fluidity of routine began to drag on. Every little interaction between them gained new weight. Her messages seemed less frequent. The kisses, more formal. The looks, vacant. Daniel began to notice details that he previously ignored. Clara now went out more, claiming that she needed time for herself, to get back in touch with her friends, with her writing, with her individuality. He understood. But attendance began to increase. She spent more time outside than inside. He invented appointments, literary events, meetings with professional colleagues he had never met. And he always came back with the same sparkle in his eyes that he had brought back from the trip. A glow that didn't include him. I didn't want to be the kind of man who spies, who suspects in advance, but it was no longer a question of jealousy, it was instinct. Something screamed inside him, and the more he tried to ignore it, the louder the noise became. Even so, he tried to rescue what he believed still existed between them. He suggested a trip for two, a weekend away from the world, something simple. Clara smiled, but refused. She said she was full of commitments, that she needed to prioritize a new project she was writing. Daniel forced a smile, stepped back and, once again, swallowed his frustration. He felt himself being pushed out of her life inch by inch, like someone being slowly replaced by a shadow. He began to close in on himself. He observed more than he spoke. He read her every gesture as if deciphering an unknown language. One night, Clara was sleeping when her cell phone vibrated on the dresser. Daniel looked at her. She breathed deeply, oblivious. He picked up the device carefully, his heart racing, and only saw a message notification. The name that appeared was just an emoji. He knew it wasn't right. But I also knew that I wouldn't be able to sleep while that doubt was alive. He did something he never thought he would do. He waited until the next day, reached out to a trusted friend who worked in technology, and asked for a favor. He gave her Clara's old cell phone, which she had retired weeks before and left in the desk drawer. He said he needed to recover some lost photos for a surprise. The friend agreed, without suspecting it. 2 days later, Daniel received the device back with the recovered data. Photos, videos, old messages. He spent the night awake looking at everything. At first, it was just everyday life. Exchanges with friends, notes about classes, drafts of texts. But then came the images from the trip. Selfies, laughter, dancing, drinks. And among these, some photos from a different angle. Clara on a balcony, with her back turned, holding a glass of wine and looking at the sea. But what caught attention was not her, but the shadow projected next to her, the shadow of a man. And further on, a photo taken from above, clearly by someone else, showing Clara lying in a hammock, her eyes closed, her smile too light for a married woman on vacation with friends. A sequence of audios and messages from an unnamed number appeared, some with phrases like, "I still hear your laugh in my ear," or, "I can't stop thinking about our last night." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The words were too intimate. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't fantasy. It was real. It was there. Wide open. The next morning, Daniel said nothing. He went to work, responded to emails, attended meetings. But inside, something was irreversibly broken. The pain did not come in explosions, but in silent, slow waves, like tides that invade little by little and destroy with patience. He didn't want to act on impulse. I knew I needed to understand more. Knowing how far it went. With whom? How long? And then he began his own investigation, without saying a word to anyone. He began to observe Clara's every exit. The schedules, the patterns. He took a day off and followed her discreetly. She entered a cafe in the city center, and soon after, a man joined her. The two sat close together, chatting like old acquaintances. They laughed. They touched each other discreetly. When they left, they walked together for 2 blocks and said goodbye with a long kiss that Clara tried to hide within the hug. Daniel's world fell silent. An absolute, deafening silence. He returned home without knowing how he had driven. He entered the apartment, looked at the pictures on the wall, at the books, at the blanket thrown on the sofa, at everything they had built. And then he sat at the kitchen table, where they had had coffee together so many times, and just cried. It wasn't a loud cry. It was silent, contained, like the rest of his pain. The images of that morning never left his mind. The touch on the arms. The hidden kiss. Her eyes smiling at another. It all seemed like part of a story he never imagined he would be starring in. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about being erased. Substituted. Left behind without even having a chance to fight. In the following days, Clara acted as if nothing had happened. I asked him how his day had been. He talked about books, about the soap opera he started watching. And Daniel responded, mechanically, with a smile that now hid a turmoil. Her every word sounded like a false echo, every gesture seemed rehearsed. But he didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to understand what motivated that. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the coldness. The preparation. The absence of guilt. And then, on a cloudy late afternoon, when she went out again to resolve a course issue, Daniel took her computer, where she kept her book drafts. Clara trusted him so much that she never bothered to hide the passwords. And it was there that Daniel found more than he expected. A document with dates, flight routes, accommodation addresses and, most importantly, 2 names printed on the tickets. Hers. And a man he had never heard of. His body froze. The blood didn't seem to circulate. Clara had purchased 2 tickets. To an international destination. With a date set for just over a month from now. An escape. A new life. A story built on the back of a marriage that she pretended to keep alive. Daniel stood up slowly, his face pale, his eyes unfocused. He went to the bathroom, looked at himself in the mirror for long minutes and, for the first time, felt disgusted with his own naivety. He didn't cry. He just took a deep breath. Betrayal wasn't just a mistake. It was a plan. Premeditated. Calculated. And now he knew. Clara came back that night with a smile on her face, brought him a sweet he liked, kissed him on the forehead and asked if he wanted to see a movie. Daniel replied yes. He sat next to her, and while she laughed at something on the screen, he watched her as if he were looking at a stranger. And at that moment, he made his decision. I wouldn't say anything. Not yet. Because now there was something much bigger to be discovered. And what Clara thought was hidden, was about to be exposed in the most painful way. On the day Clara turned 35, Daniel prepared her favorite dinner, lit candles around the house and played soft music. The table was set with silver cutlery that they only used on special occasions. The wine that she had once said, years ago, was the best she had ever tasted. When she entered the apartment, he greeted her with a kiss on the cheek and a serene smile. She was visibly surprised, hesitated, said something about having completely forgotten he would do something like that, but he pretended not to care. He said he wanted her there, that he missed being closer. She apologized, thanked him for his effort, hugged him with her cold arms. They ate dinner in silence for long minutes. Daniel observed their gestures as if he were watching a play on stage. Every bite, every sip of wine, every look away. And then, while she was talking about work and the readings she needed to review, he got up, went to his office, and came back with a small box in his hands. Clara raised her eyebrows. "Did you buy me a gift?" he asked with a nervous laugh. Daniel nodded, handed her the box, and watched as she opened it. Inside, 2 notes printed with her and another man's names. Departure to Lisbon. 2 tickets, hotel booked, date set. Clara turned pale. The lips trembled. "I didn't say anything." She just looked at him as if searching for a lie where there was only silence. Daniel sat down at the table again and looked into her eyes. She tried to speak, but he interrupted her with a firm voice, without raising the tone. "That's what you wanted, wasn't it?" he said. "Running away with someone, disappearing, starting a new life. You thought you could do this without me knowing, that I would be here, waiting for you to return from a literary trip. And maybe I would be, if I hadn't opened my eyes in time." Clara swallowed, touched the paper with trembling fingers, not knowing what to say. The courage she thought she had disappeared. The speech she had rehearsed for the moment she was discovered, if she ever was, dissolved into fragments of fear. "You're exaggerating," he tried to argue, but his voice wavered. Daniel laughed, a dry, short, sharp laugh. "Exaggerating," he repeated, getting up. He went to the bookshelf, took out a folder and threw it on the table. There were copies of conversations, call records, reservation receipts, proof of bank transfers made in her name. Clara put her hands to her face and murmured something incomprehensible. And then, finally, he cried. But Daniel was unmoved. This was not the woman he had fallen in love with. The person in front of him was someone who, in silence, turned him into a spectator of his own life. He was no longer heartbroken. "I was tired. And decided." And it was there, in front of that scene of emotional destruction, that he took a deep breath and dropped the bomb he had discovered shortly before. "Are you really going to look me in the eye and say this was all just about passion, desire, escapism?" he asked. Clara was silent. "Because I can understand that. Not forgive, but understand. But you're not just running from me. You're running with a man who happened to be investigated for bank fraud 3 years ago. A man who has used 3 different identities. And more than that, you're running with someone who's run before." Clara looked at him, confused, with a frown. The mind raced trying to reach the logic behind those words. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, as if asking to hear what he doesn't want to know. Daniel crossed his arms, approached the window and said, without looking away from the nothing outside, "He has a wife. And 2 children. And he lives less than 40 minutes from here. His real name is not the one that appears on the ticket. He showed you a false name, a false profile, a false story. But unlike you, he didn't leave such bad traces." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The wine glass in his hand slipped and fell to the floor, shattering silently. Daniel's words entered her like a blade. Every part of the plan, every step she had taken, now seemed ridiculous. She didn't know anything. I thought I was being smart, careful, but I was being manipulated by someone even more skilled. Daniel continued, now closer. He's married, Clara. He has young children. He works for an export company and spends days traveling. His wife welcomed me when I went to their house. I didn't say who I was. I just said I wanted to buy a car. He sells used cars, among other things. She thought I was just another customer. Clara's eyes widened. Did you go to his house? He muttered. Of course I was. Did you really think I was going to leave it like that? That I was going to silently accept being left behind? Daniel's voice was starting to get heavy. But it was the weight of someone who was tired of swallowing. And that's when I realized everything. It wasn't just you who was being deceived. He also created a parallel world. To you, he was the disillusioned romantic. To his wife, the devoted father. To his clients, an honest man. But to me, he was just another coward. Clara got up with difficulty. His legs were shaking. She walked over to the couch and sat down, saying nothing for long seconds. I was in shock. The colorless face, the cold hands. Did you investigate him? Daniel nodded. You gave me every reason for this. And you know what's worse? I thought I would hate you for all of this. But deep down, I just felt sorry. Because even your betrayal wasn't original. You fell for the trick of someone who has been doing this for years. Someone who builds women up and then destroys them. The silence in the room was heavy. All that could be heard was Clara's panting and the sound of the clock on the wall. He told me that he was going to leave everything, that we were going to start from scratch, that he just needed time to sort out his life, she said, almost in whispers, as if apologizing to herself. Daniel didn't respond. He just walked to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, came back and put it in her hand. Clara drank like someone trying to put out a fire inside. He already left you, said Daniel. From the beginning. He just wanted to escape his own life, and you were the means. And now, that you are no longer in our marriage, he will no longer need to hide that you were just another one. Those words were a punch. Clara flinched, putting her hand to her chest. What are you going to do now? He asked. Nothing, he replied. I've done everything. I've talked to the lawyer. The papers are already being prepared. The joint account has been closed. The passwords have been changed. The house, sold. You'll get your share. More than you deserve, considering you almost destroyed not only my life, but your own. She tried to get up, but fell back onto the couch, defeated. Daniel, I made a mistake. I made so many mistakes. But I lost myself. He interrupted, with a firm gaze. I don't care why. What interests me is that, even after everything, I was still loyal to the end. And you weren't. Clara was crying silently now. There were no more screams, justifications or defenses. The castle she tried to build with wet sand had crumbled before her. Daniel, for his part, was calm. The pain he had felt before had turned into a kind of release. Finally he saw clearly. There was no more illusion. There were no more doubts. And as cruel as it was, there was a certain relief in having it all out in the open. Because when the truth comes out, even the worst betrayal takes shape. And now, he knew that his life would not end there. But hers, yes, was about to change forever. Clara spent that night in silence. He didn't try to reverse it, he didn't insist, he didn't beg. She knew there was no more fertile ground between them, just rubble. When the day dawned, Daniel was no longer at home. On the living room table, he left an organized folder with the first divorce documents and a handwritten sheet with cold and clear instructions about what still needed to be resolved. No more words. No room for reconciliation. Clara read everything with cold, shaking hands. The sun shined through the crack in the curtain as if mocking its ruin. She walked around the house like a ghost, touching the furniture that now seemed to no longer belong to her, the pictures on the walls, the books on the shelves, everything seemed to be observing her, judging her. Nothing sounded familiar. And for the first time since returning from his trip, he felt like he had fallen into the very hole he had dug, a hole too deep to climb out of without scars. In the following weeks, Clara distanced herself from everyone. She stopped responding to her friends, cancelled classes, left the studio closed. I spent my days between the couch and bed, trying to make sense of what was left. He called his lover several times. No response. Sent messages. All viewed. None returned. He tried to talk to him in other ways, but all the doors were locked. Finally, the penny dropped, he had really disappeared. The escape that she imagined, that she painted in her mind with tones of freedom and new beginnings, was in fact the end of a poisoned fairy tale. One that never had a base, never had a plan. And, the cruelest thing, there was never reciprocity. One afternoon, unable to deal with the silence, Clara decided to look for the house where Daniel said he had gone. He arrived at the address with sweaty hands, his heart beating in his neck. It was a simple neighborhood, semi-detached houses, small yards and old trees. The doorbell rang. A woman answered with a baby on her lap. "You must be mistaken, there is no one with that name here," he replied, when Clara asked for the man she was looking for. But the woman's gaze wavered for a second. Clara noticed. He insisted. "Please, it's important. I don't want to cause trouble. I just want to understand." The woman hesitated, looked inside, as if weighing between pain and dignity. Then, without a word, he closed the door slowly. Clara stood there, standing on the sidewalk, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. He really was gone. The woman probably knew everything and preferred silence. Clara understood. Now she also preferred silence. On the other side of the city, Daniel had rented a small temporary apartment, discreet, with basic furniture and no souvenirs. "I wanted to start from scratch. I spent my nights organizing the next steps of the divorce, re-evaluating old projects, calling friends I had left aside." He reconnected, rediscovered smiles, sought refuge in routine. But there was no rush to start over. Just the need to move on, not to stop at the trauma, not to allow that experience to define him. One of those nights, he was surprised by a message from Anna, an old college friend with whom he had lost contact. They exchanged likes on social media, sometimes brief comments, but nothing deep. She found out about the separation through mutual friends and decided to write. The reunion was casual, scheduled for coffee. Anna was intelligent, articulate, with a gentle and empathetic humor. Daniel felt comfortable. She didn't ask invasive questions, she didn't try to console with ready-made phrases. He was just there, listening, laughing at old stories, sharing his own pains and failures. She was a woman who had gone through a difficult divorce years before and spoke about it with the lightness of someone who survived. In the following weeks, meetings became frequent. Simple dinners, long walks, conversations about everything and nothing. Daniel wasn't looking for a new love. But he also no longer ran away from the possibility. He felt whole next to her. And, for the first time in a long time, he felt like he didn't need to explain himself to be understood. Meanwhile, Clara faced a slow and painful process. He tried to go back to work, but everything seemed hopeless. The words no longer flowed. The texts that I used to write with passion now sounded empty. The students, who had always admired her, noticed her emotional absence. Even the paintings in the studio began to lose color. The divorce went efficiently. Daniel kept his promise not to demean her financially, but he also maintained his emotional distance. There were no fights. There was an absence. And that was the cruelest part. The silence between them was now definitive. A silence that did not generate reflection, but an end. She tried, on a belated impulse, to arrange a coffee with him to talk without hurt feelings. Daniel responded politely, but declined. He said he didn't see any point in changing what had already been decided. You have the right to follow, and so do I. Let's respect that. Those were the last words exchanged between them. Months later, Clara met, by chance, one of the friends she traveled with. The conversation was uncomfortable. There was a moment when the friend hesitated and said, "You know he wasn't who he said he was, right?" Clara pretended to be surprised. The friend continued, "He tried something with me too. I didn't tell you because I thought you would figure it out on your own. He asked me out, said you were confused, that you were thinking about breaking up. I thought it was disgusting. Then he disappeared." Clara just nodded, as if confirming an already known pain. The world he had built around that relationship, even in the shadows, was even more fragile than he imagined. Daniel, months later, walked alongside Anna through a street fair, holding a bag of fruit and smiling lightly. She made a joke about the way he picked oranges, and he laughed, putting his shoulder against hers. That simplicity, was everything he needed. There were no promises, no big plans, just presence. And it was in this new daily life that he discovered that love doesn't have to be an uncontrolled euphoria. It can be calm. It could be reconstruction. It can be comfortable silence. Clara, now living in a smaller apartment, reworked her life with necessary slowness. He started writing again, but not novels. She wrote letters to herself. Little outbursts that would never be sent. Little by little, he began to understand that what he had lost was not just a marriage, but his own ability to recognize himself. She no longer looked for answers. Did you know that some pains don't ask for an explanation, just time? And time, as cruel as it is, also knows how to sew wounds. The meeting between them did not happen again. There was no reconciliation, there was no second chance. Because some stories, even though they were real, are not destined to be eternal. They serve to teach, to shape, to transform. Daniel did not forget what he experienced, but he chose not to carry the weight any longer. Clara didn't forgive herself immediately, but she understood that forgiving herself was the only possible path. And that was how, in silence, each one met their own end. Not as they had planned, but how they needed it. It was during a gray autumn afternoon, the kind where the wind seems to whisper old memories through the half-open windows, that Clara received the envelope with the official confirmation of the sale of the apartment where she had lived with Daniel. The keys had already been handed over weeks ago, but seeing the printed document, with your signature next to his, hurt in a different way. It was definitive. No window would keep their reflection any longer, no wall would hear muffled laughter in the middle of the night. That place now belonged to another story, another couple, another life. Clara held the paper delicately, as if it could fall apart in her hands, and sat on the floor of the new room, where unopened boxes awaited patience she didn't have. The air smelled of fresh paint and loneliness. He took a deep breath, hugged his knees and allowed himself to cry like he hadn't done since his last conversation with Daniel. He, in turn, was walking along a small wooded trail with Anna, the two of them wearing light coats and cups of coffee in their hands. The conversation revolved around travel plans, a possible trip to the countryside on the next holiday. Anna was talking about a place she visited with her parents as a child, and Daniel listened attentively, laughing at her exaggerated reports about the killer mosquitoes in the mountains and the freezing nights in poorly insulated chalets. On the outside, he seemed at peace, and he was. But somewhere hidden inside him, there was still an open scar that throbbed every now and then. Not for lack of overcoming, but for memory. Some pain doesn't go away, you just learn to behave. Later that same night, Anna noticed something different about Daniel. While they were having dinner at home, he became more silent, distracted. He asked if everything was okay and he replied yes, just a little tired. But she knew him well enough to know there was something more. He waited for the silence to finish speaking before asking again, more delicately. Daniel looked into her eyes and, after a few seconds, said honestly that he carried an old weight, a memory that had returned with greater force after signing the last division papers. It's like a part of me was buried with that apartment, you know. Not because of the house itself, but because it was the last place where I still heard my old life screaming inside. Anna held his hand and, without trying to heal him, just listened to him. I'm not her, and you're not the same anymore. But I respect what you were. And if I ever need to go back to that place, even if only in memory, I can wait out here until you come back. Daniel hugged her without saying anything. That was all I needed to hear. In another part of the city, Clara went for a walk alone after days of being locked up. The cold bit her arms, but she liked the feeling. He passed a newspaper stand, saw a book highlighted in the window, and recognized the author as a former Congress colleague. She thought about how she had moved away from everything that made her feel alive: literature, debates, rooms full of students. The pain and regret had taken up too much space. He decided to go into a nearby bookstore, something he hadn't done in months. She walked between the shelves, touched covers, read back covers, let the words pull her back to the surface. He bought 2 books and walked home. At the corner of the market, he saw a couple laughing with a child on their shoulders. The man had a beard similar to Daniel's. For an instant, his heart accelerated. But it wasn't him. And yet, that was enough to trigger another wave of memories. Unable to control it, Clara sent a message to Daniel. It wasn't about reconciliation, nor apologies. Just one sentence: I hope you're okay. Today I saw a reflection of you in someone, and it hurt, but it also made me smile. She didn't expect an answer. And it didn't. But just by sending it, he felt like he had given something back to the world. As if he was, little by little, cleaning up the trail of destruction he had left. Days later, Clara went to visit her parents. I had been avoiding him for a long time, afraid of the looks that knew too much. The mother welcomed her with a firm hug, as if she still held a piece of the daughter that existed before everything. Her father prepared coffee and watched her as if trying to decipher something on her face. During lunch, amid superficial conversations about neighbors, recipes, and the price of gas, his mother said, bluntly, "Do you still love him?" Clara hesitated, looked at the plate and responded in a low but firm voice. "I think so. But loving, sometimes, isn't enough when we hurt too much." The father nodded with a slight nod. Nobody said anything else. The silence there was respect. At the same time, Daniel was drinking wine with Anna on the balcony of her apartment, watching the night fall. The two of them talked about old films, and she said that he needed to stop pretending to like European cinema just to appear intellectual. He laughed, said it was charm, not pretense. Her touch was light, the kisses were slow, the silences filled with connection. But the past still knocked on the door from time to time. Not as an enemy, but as a reminder. And Daniel knew he would never forget Clara. Not the way you erase someone. But the way you archive a story that was important. The resentment was gone, but the memory remained. On a Sunday morning, Clara finally decided to reopen the studio. He cleaned the space, reorganized the books, hung old paintings and, in the corner of the room, placed a new blank canvas. He painted for hours, until his fingers went numb and the smell of paint invaded the room. There was no rush, there was no right direction. Just the need to transform what I felt into something I could look at without pain. Days later, he exhibited the paintings in a small independent gallery. He didn't invite anyone he knew. But among the anonymous visitors, a lady approached and said, "Your paintings hurt. But they also heal." Clara smiled. It was exactly that. Daniel never knew about this exhibition. And Clara never told. Just as he never told her that he had found his peace again with someone who looked at him with truth, with presence. Lives went on. At some distant point, perhaps in another time, they could even meet. But now, they were too whole to want to fix something that no longer fit into the present. On a random Saturday, Anna asked Daniel if he still had anything from his old life. He said yes. A letter he never delivered. A letter he wrote right after the end, on one of those days when the pain was too sharp to ignore. Do you still want to keep it? Anna asked. Daniel looked at the closet where she kept it, thought for a few seconds and replied, yes. Not out of attachment. But because it reminds me of who I was and who I never want to be again. And so, between small actions and great silences, the two continued. Clara, now more mature, learned to forgive herself without rushing. Daniel, lighter, learned to trust again. Both rebuilt their lives not as someone trying to forget what they experienced, but as someone who understands that, sometimes, we have to accept pain to not allow it to define us forever. Because some stories don't end when they end, they continue within us, shaping us into who we are after the fall. Months had passed since their last contact. Time, despite not erasing the past, has transformed the sharp edges of memory into smoother shapes, like stone that is slowly polished by the river current. Daniel no longer thought about Clara every day, but there were moments when memories emerged uninvited, not with pain, but with that kind of longing that doesn't ask for return, just recognition. He was still with Anna, now in a new apartment, full of natural light and small plants that she cared for as if they were extensions of her soul. Weekends were filled with spontaneous walks, slow coffees and a complicity that didn't need words to be understood. It was not a love marked by explosions or drama, but by consistency. And it was precisely this constancy that he learned to value. After being torn from the inside, Daniel found, in everyday life, alongside Anna, the stitching that rebuilt him. An unexpected invitation arrived by email on a rainy Tuesday. It was from a university that promoted a lecture on emotional overcoming and personal beginnings, and they asked Daniel to participate in a panel as a guest, as he had been writing discreet texts about personal transformation in a digital column. He accepted, not out of ego, but out of a sincere desire to share what he had learned with those who, perhaps, were going through similar pains. During his speech, he did not mention names or detail betrayals, but the essence of the story was clear to everyone: the trust that is broken, the ground that disappears, the silent reconstruction of those who decide not to be defined by their wounds. When he finished, he received a standing ovation. Among those present, a woman sitting in the last row remained motionless. His eyes shone, not with emotion, but with shame. Clara was gone. Not because I wanted to confront him, but because I needed to listen. And, as she listened to his words, she felt as if she were naked in front of everyone, not because of judgment, but because the truth spoken gently has more strength than any accusation. She left before he saw her. He walked down the sodden street with slow steps, feeling every drop like a bitter absolution. That night he wrote a letter. Not to deliver, but to release. He said everything he didn't have the courage to say before. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He recognized the flaws, the lies, the small daily deaths he caused without realizing it. And, in the end, she wished him to be happy. Because I loved him. Not like before, but with the maturity of someone who finally understood that loving is not just feeling, it's not hurting. The next morning, Clara left the letter on her desk, sealed. It would be kept there, as a testament to what it has become. On the wall of the studio, now reopened and visited by small groups, he hung his most recent painting. A woman with her back turned, in the middle of the rough sea, holding a broken mirror in her hands. The play was noted by critics as a powerful metaphor about confronting one's own destruction. The studio gained prominence, invitations appeared, exhibitions were scheduled. But she no longer sought applause. The recognition now came from the serenity with which she faced her own demons. Clara no longer hid, but she also didn't need to be seen. She followed, with firm steps and a more sober look. Daniel, upon learning about the exhibition through a magazine article, felt neither anger nor longing. Just a strange peace. It was as if somehow that story had finally come to an end. He looked at Anna, who was cutting fruit in the kitchen and humming softly, and realized that he didn't need anything else. Because what was there was whole. And it was never a lie. Clara, one day, received an unexpected call. She was the wife of that man he planned to run away with. The woman had recently discovered everything. For some reason, only now had his lies collapsed. The connection was not an attack. It was an outburst. They talked for long minutes. And, in the end, when the woman said, "We always think it will be different with us, right?" Clara just replied, "And it always is, but almost never in the way we expect." They hung up without resentment. Both injured. Both survivors. The truth is that victims are sometimes confused with accomplices. And only time separates. Daniel's life took an unexpected turn months later. Anna discovered a job offer abroad. An academic project that he always dreamed of leading. When he found out, he didn't hesitate. He said he would support her. That maybe it was time for both of them to experience something new. The decision was mutual. They moved together to a different country, a new language, new challenges. And in this change, Daniel realized that he had finally ended the cycle that had begun with a marriage destroyed by lies. Now he was a whole man alongside someone who walked with him, not against him. Clara stayed. But it didn't stay still. Wrote a book. He called it, "What's Left When We Lie." It was a hit among discreet readers, spread by word of mouth, reviewed with admiration for its raw honesty. It wasn't an apology, it was a mirror. And many found themselves there. Among the characters, a silent man, a woman who cheated, and an entire life rebuilt among ruins. It was fiction. But those who knew his story knew that the truth was between the lines. And so, without forced reunions or arranged endings, each one followed different paths. Daniel found in Anna what he always deserved, loyalty and serenity. Clara, in turn, did not have immediate redemption, but found herself in the most painful process of all, that of looking inside and accepting who she had become. Both experienced love. They both lost it. But only one of them destroyed it. If you've made it this far, tell me, what did you think of this story? What marked you most about her? I really want to know your opinion. And if this story hooked you in any way, subscribe to the channel right now. Here, every week, we have impactful stories about love, lies, choices and consequences, always with a plot that makes you reflect on life. And remember, this channel does not support, does not romanticize and never justifies any type of betrayal. The stories are fiction, but the feelings they touch, those are real. Until next time.